LinkedIn och på Facebook.
Ja,
precis.
ja.
Det var bara två enda ställena.
Det var ju bra. Det gäller ju mig också. Så att det var någon som hörde av sig till mig och så här, jag har inte fått några anmälningar. Så bara, nej men har du gjort någon reklam? Nej, det var liksom, okej, nej men det kanske det
Precis,
göra
också. Precis. Folk kan ju inte in på det. Det är så jäkla många inne på där inne. Så att man hittar liksom inte.
Precis. Yes. Nu är det 7 pers som, eller så här 5 personer som väntar. Klockan är 29. Ska vi släppa in dem?
Ja, gör det.
Det är lika bra. Welcome everyone to this lunch seminar hosted by Dandy People, and it's a part of Agile20Reflect Festival. So it's going to be recorded. So if you don't want to have your camera on, that's okay. But if you want to, that's fine as well. And we will have all questions after Erik has presented. So please write them in the chat and I'll take care of them. So thank you and welcome. And it's 12:30, so
yeah.
Let's give it over to Erik.
All right, thank you, Patrick. It's only 30 minutes, so I think we need to get started right away. And as mentioned, it would be very nice if you could show me your beautiful faces, so I have something to look at, and not just your name. So thank you for that. Yes, swimming in uncertainty. That's basically the topic of this talk, with the sort of the subtitle "Assumptions Mapping and OKRs." And of course, always curious to know what brought you to this. But as mentioned, let's take the questions afterwards. I think and hope there will be a little bit of a time for questions, even though we only have 30 minutes and for a quite complex topic. But what I hope you will get out of this talk is basically 3 things. You will hopefully start treating everything you see as assumptions, which we rarely do. And also start thinking about how to make uncertainty more explicit when we make decisions and when we sort of construct organizations or when we make plans. And last but not least, of course, make sure that you sometimes sort of take your head up from the water. And I will explain what I mean by that in a bit. But just a few words about us. And I mean, my company is called leanforward. We're a small little business in Malmö. And I think our current sort of best version of what we want to do is this: help companies of all sizes connect the dots between strategy and action in a way that engages everyone, especially when stakes and uncertainty are both high. Whew, that's a long sentence. But you can pretty much sum it up with Agile, OKRs, and humans. That's pretty much what we do. And currently, I'm spending most of my time with a large Swedish retailer with a yellow and blue brand that you might have heard of, which is very fun. But if you want to find us, you can find us here. On this little pale blue dot. This picture is taken 6 billion kilometers away into space. And of course, the pale blue dot is Earth. I think it is the photo where you can see Earth from the furthest away, and I guess it's a little humbling picture to see. So yes, here we are. But of course, this picture doesn't really provide you with any meaningful information. Really, it's just a dot on the screen. So another way to maybe show where we are sitting is to show this picture, this map, and. Now it's of course, much more information, and it tells you that, oh yes, we are you sitting in Malmö, and we used to have an office in the city center, but now this actually points to my home because we don't, for obvious reasons, we haven't had an office the last year. But still, I mean, in order to understand this picture, I mean, I don't really know who was sort of attending this talk, so. You need to be a little bit sort of aware about, okay, Malmö is in southern Sweden and there's Copenhagen. Okay, so you can sort of, in a way, maybe picture where this is. So this would be a third way to sort of illustrate where we are. Okay, now I've zoomed out a bit, and now you sort of only need to be aware about sort of this part of Europe, and I guess most people understand it. Okay, so it's southern Sweden and it's close to Copenhagen. Okay, now sort of you understand where we are. And the reason I'm sort of showing you these three maps is because they all contain information, but it's, of course, they're only meaningful to, well, if you sort of have the right contextual framework to sort of put them in. I mean, if you were only locals, every one of you living in Malmö, in the town that we're sitting in, maybe I would show you like a picture of our office or the street that we live in instead. But if this map would provide you with different types of meaning depending on sort of your context and your reference points, and that is something we will return to in a bit. But you might be wondering why I call this talk "Swimming in Uncertainty." What do I mean by this, and why I have a picture of myself in a lake with sort of my nose barely above the water. Well, the thing is with uncertainty, of course, you have seen the Agile Manifesto. Otherwise, you wouldn't be at an Agile20Reflect Festival. And you know that one of the sort of core principles is responding to change over following a plan. And what does that actually mean? Well, of course, when should you follow a plan and when should you respond to change? Well, if you stand in the present and you look to the future, you might ask yourself two questions. What do we sort of know about the present, and how certain are we about that? And how predictable is the future? And if it is the case that, well, we have perfect knowledge about the present and the future is perfectly predictable within a reasonable sort of degree of error, then follow the plan. Don't respond to change. So if that's the case, then you should follow a plan. But otherwise, you should respond to change. And change then means uncertainty by itself, because you sort of accept the fact that, well, we don't actually know what we know today, and the future is actually unpredictable. So you can sort of think about this as your sort of, well, roadmap or map ahead of you. And if you have the present and the future on the x-axis, you can sort of almost draw like the inside to the outside on the other axis, which means that at the sort of the closest to you, the absolute closest to you, you have your beliefs and your assumptions. And from those beliefs and assumptions, you make decisions that turns into some activities, some work or tasks that you do. And those tasks and activities produces something. You're building something, or you're offering something, or some kind of output. And then a critical thing happens. That output that you have built reaches some user, some customer. And you can see that there's a bolder line here, because this is the critical sort of line where you're crossing from your world, your reality, out into the customers, outside of your building or your office or your organization. And of course, then you can go even further and talk about the world of your customers, and even sort of the world outside your customers. And if you split time into different sort of sections like that, there is a certain amount of time where you can act and you can make decisions with a certain level of degree of certainty, sort of the actionable horizon. And maybe there is a slightly longer horizon, which is the strategic horizon. And there is even further away, there is maybe even even a conceivable horizon, where beyond this point, you can't even sort of, it's impossible to even conceive what the future will be like beyond this point. And so now you have like various degrees of uncertainty in various stages of this map. And these are just to fill up if you read this slide afterwards to see what they mean. But basically now you can start to split this up into something like, if you are sort of in the bottom part of this, you are sort of below the surface and you're swimming around in this uncertainty. And above the surface is sort of in the world outside. So just to clean that up, this is basically what this tries to convey. You have your reality, your organization, or your company or your business, which basically consists of your ambitions and your assumptions and your actions. And then you have the world you want to influence, which is outside that world. And this is sort of where this swimming in uncertainty comes in, because it's so easy to sort of only stay within this, well, below the surface. And this is a perfect example of that. This person here is called Hiro Onoda. He was a soldier in the Japanese army, and he fought in the Second World War. He was situated in the Philippines, and he was discovered in 1974. And when they found him, he believed that the war was still raging. So he didn't sort of know that the war has ended. So he sort of still fought the war in the jungle in the Philippines and waited for sort of directions, which of course never came. But he was living in his reality where the war was still going on. So you can basically say that he was definitely not sort of above the surface here. He was below the surface and living in his own reality. And there are, of course, many examples from the business world from this as well. This is some research from a professor, James O'Toole, that he analyzed General Motors in the early 70s, and he tried to identify what the management team of General Motors, what did they believe in? What were their sort of core assumptions? What did they base all of their decisions on? And he came up with a list of 10 things, and you don't need to read it specifically. I can just show you some examples. So in the early 70s, the management team there, they believed that energy will always be abundant and cheap. They were like, they couldn't imagine a world where this wasn't the case, which of course we know that in the 70s, the oil crisis, everything just came a few years later. And they also believe that the US car market is isolated from the rest of the world. Foreign competitors will never gain more than 5 to 15% of the domestic market. General Motors believe this. And obviously we know now that the Japanese cars came in and almost dominated the market. And now Toyota is the biggest car company in the world. But they were living in a reality where this was truth. So this is of course very dangerous, obviously, to live in sort of the wrong reality. But the fact is, your assumptions can be correct at one point in time, but the winds of change is always blowing in this world outside. And there are things like, I would say that there are 3 types of changes that typically happen. There are big phase shifts, like for example, when the car came out on the market and in the early 20th century, in a relatively short time, it sort of almost eliminated like horses and carts and things like that completely from the streets of our cities. And once that has happened, you can't go back. So this is like it's a new world. It's a new reality. A new society has sort of changed completely. It's shifted into something else. And I guess you can say the same thing about the internet and the mobile phone or other types of. It's often technology driven. This phase shift. But it's a phase shift because society switches over to another type of society in a way, and you can't go back. And then there are the black swans, which are these rare, surprising events with significant impact that some people claim that the pandemic, for example, last year was a typical black swan. On the other hand, some people say, no, well, actually, it was kind of predictable because we were in for a pandemic sooner or later. It was we didn't know exactly when, but it was about to happen sometime. So a black swan is really, it's really sort of, are you watching for it or not? If you're not watching for it, then yes, it will be surprising. But if you're watching for it, then it can actually be predictable. And of course, the last type of change is the fairly more common cyclical change, which is typically recessions and ups and downs in the economy or even the seasons. So when you add these 3 together, it's very windy and almost chaotic here on the outside, and things are constantly changing. And I think we almost can feel that this change is accelerating and changing faster and faster. So your assumptions always needs to be constantly revisited and challenged, because you don't want to have the wrong assumptions, of course, about the world outside. So then let's talk a little bit about assumption maps then. And assumption maps, well, first of all, what is a map? Well, this book here is a fascinating read about that topic, how maps work. But in a way, you can say it's sort of, well, this is one definition: a structure of relationships between elements of some space meant to assist the human brain with perception and understanding. And of course, typically it's geographical maps we think about, but when it comes to business, there are other types of maps. And then we have assumptions, which are, of course, something that you believe to be true, but you can have more or less evidence about it actually being true. And sometimes if you have no evidence, it's actually just an opinion or like a gut feeling or something like that. Versus if it's strong evidence, yes, well, then it's maybe close to a fact. But then an assumption can also be important or not important, depending on whether or not is this assumption critical for me to achieve the goal I have or not? That sort of determines if it's important or not important. So assumption maps is when you sort of bring these two together and you start to, you want to understand the assumptions you have so you can manage them better. And again, as I said, map is typically a geographical map, but in business, we use things like, this is a fairly well-known example, a business model canvas is in some ways a map of a business model. And it's typically used where you fill in like different, okay, we have different key partners and key activities and value, but you try to sort of map up the structure of your business model. And of course, if you are like an early stage startup where none of this is really proven and you are just at the start of your journey into building a business, all of these are just very high risk assumptions with very low level of evidence. And if you are an established company, then yes, maybe you know this. You already have all of this sort of proven and built up, but still, I would argue that are they still true 1 year into the future or 2 years into the future or 5 years into the future? That is still remains to be seen. So this is another type of a map. It's a lean growth canvas. We've been using it with multiple teams to help them understand how to grow their product. And again, you sort of fill it up with different sort of assumptions on the way to understand how growth happens. Customer journey maps you might have seen, where you try to understand the customer's journey through an experience with highs and lows, and where do we make them happy, where do we make them sad, and so forth. This is an attempt to understand how you deliver value to your customers. And the product personas is maybe not a map, but it's a bunch of assumptions about a particular archetypical user that helps you understand how they think and behave. But there are also, of course, other types of maps in a way, where you have process flows in a flow chart. This can be seen as something. Yes, this is the fact. This is how we document each step. But it can also be seen as, well, actually, is this actually the case? Is this actually the same as reality or not? And you can even think about your budgets, I would say, as a kind of well, maybe not a map, depending on how you visualize it, perhaps, but it's definitely full of assumptions for sure. I mean, how many assumptions do you have in your annual budget? I think that's a good question to ask. How many assumptions did we have in December 2019 about 2020 that came out completely wrong? And are we tracking those assumptions? Are we sort of assessing them on sort of how certain they are or not? Or are we like the Japanese soldier who is sort of basing all of our decisions on something that is completely wrong? So these are just some examples. And I think, I mean, they can look like, well, these maps can look in any types of way. It's just, the point is that they provide some kind of structure of relationships and assumptions that should sort of provide some kind of clarity on your certainty level. But most of all, they should, of course, help sort of the human brain understand like something that can be complex or complicated. And in a company or in an organization, of course, you have multiple maps like this, and they can be, in a way, connected with each other. This is rarely, of course, explicit, but in reality, this is actually what it's like. One map can sort of be a part of another map, and you can sort of jump into something and go down one detail level and sort of have its own map on that layer. And there are often, of course, teams working with one particular sort of map or one sort of view of the world that should fit into something bigger. So this is sort of one way to look at an organization that I think we rarely do. This is we often don't like see our organization through these glasses. Again, these are often not explicit as here. But this is actually sort of how the organization can explore. And I would argue that if we were to sort of build organizations from scratch today, I think this way of thinking about them and looking at them would make sense. Because going back to this about the sort of having maps on different levels, if we can provide every sort of employee with a map of the world outside that they need to be aware about and understand, it would be like this. There would be different maps depending on which level you are, but each map would sort of be a part of another map, perhaps. And this is very much in contrast to, like, if we think about organizations, it often looks like this. It's some kind of hierarchical organization chart where you have someone at the top with the highest authority, and then you have less authority, and so forth. And this is a typical sort of, this is how this map happens when you have this execution mindset, where someone at the top, well, it's maybe not as extreme as that, but I think it comes from the mindset of someone at the top having a plan and just telling the organization to execute that plan. I mean, it's called Chief Executing Officer, not Chief Exploring Officer, which might be a more like 21st century title. So this way of thinking and this structure comes from, okay, someone has a plan and the organization should execute that plan. So back to the water picture and the fishes, and so we need to have these maps all over. We need to sort of start making these assumptions explicit, bring them out and use them as our sort of guiding posts when we make decisions. Of course, we need to have those little periscopes coming up all the time so that we are aware of what's happening out in the real world, and we are not making the wrong decisions. And then OKRs, then objectives and key results. Unfortunately, there's really not time to sort of go deeper into that. Other than that, objectives and key results is something you can use to set sort of, well, short-term goals. That should of course be well, in the real world, so to speak, outcome oriented, to help you guide where you should be navigating. And I guess you can sort of visualize it like this: if you are a team of swimmers that's going out, and you have a long-term vision, you have something in the distance you want to accomplish. So there are many ways to get there, and this path ahead of you is very uncertain. And then you can set up a short-term goal that makes it, again, this would be within this sort of this actionable horizon. It would move you closer to your target, so you can go there. So again, we're really just only touching the surface here, but I would argue that this is one way of thinking about your organization and your work that is maybe not, the most typical way we do it. But if you think about your reality is really made up of these things: your ambitions and your assumptions and your actions. And of course, our actions, we can use typical agile frameworks such as Scrum or Kanban or something else to work with. But if we are generally poor at managing the assumptions and the ambitions part of this. We have spent the entire 20th century, I would argue, to be good at planning and to executing and to optimizing how we perform actions. And we now need to be equally good at the other two things, managing our ambitions and our assumptions. So that's basically this swimming in uncertainty topic. And then maybe now it's a little bit more clear why I have this picture of myself in a lake like this. And I think we have some minutes now actually left for questions, if there are any.
Yes, we have about 10 minutes or 9-10 minutes for questions. So don't be shy. If you have anything to ask Erik, you can either write them in the chat or unmute and ask away. And I can say that I liked what you did there in the end, touching the surface. It was a nice joke.
Okay, I think I missed that myself.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, if you have tried implementing value streams or things like that, I think that sort of is within this area. So is there any way to combine using visual maps with OKRs? Well, I think, I mean, if you have a map, yes, Wordle maps, of course, yes, that's one type of map. But if you have a like, for example, a customer journey map, I think is a very good type of map to understand your user. Of course, if you have a customer journey map, you can start understanding. First of all, you understand how certain are we about how good we are about delivering value in each step of the customer journey map. A customer journey map is supposed to be let's see if I can jump back to it here. Here it is. So a customer journey map is basically we are interacting with the customer through different steps, and in some steps we are good at delivering value to our customers. In some other steps, maybe we are underperforming. But how certain about that are we actually? And can we measure these steps? Can we measure how well we succeed with interacting with the customer? Those measurements, I would say, are excellent sort of key results in an objective, because if you are failing, for example, I don't know if you can see a mouse pointer, but in this particular step here, it seems like the user is confused and frustrated. So for this team, I would probably try to, maybe we need to have an OKR about improving this particular step. And of course, if we can measure it, then that are excellent candidates for key results. Okay, let's see. It seems like you are talking about Boardly maps in the chat.
Yeah, and there was something about Kellogg mapping as well.
A question here, and I also very much appreciate your T-shirt. What your future research directions are for yourself on this subject? What's the edge of your knowledge here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, we are. I mean, if you noticed on our on the last slide here, I would dream about in some way trying to build some kind of product out of this that could help people actually map up assumptions like that. And if you go to impactseek.com, you can sign up to a waiting list for something like that. But that's very early stage at the moment. I think this is just something. I honestly believe that this way of thinking is as sort of profound as sort of the almost like the the early 20th century management philosophy when that came out. So I think this is like the basis for what management will be like in the 21st century, something around those this area. It's a really fascinating topic. How about yourself? What is your Alan? What is your where are you in this?
So I'm coming at this from multiple directions, but again, yeah, I see sort of strategic incompetence in most of my clients, and trying to connect what their actual intents are to the impacts that they are making or think they're making and the behaviors. So I'm very much interested in the Kellogg space, and I'm motivated by what the product people are doing, like John Cutler, etc. So they seem to be at the edge of thinking to my mind right now. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned him. I actually meet Jan on Thursday. So yes, absolutely. He's definitely sort of at the edge of this.
We have another question in the chat as well that I also would like the answer to. That is, what is Kellogg mapping?
Kellogg mapping? Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, this is just a fairly novel thing that's coming up in some of the Slacks. So Kellogg model, right? The impact behavior down to outputs, down to resources. That chain, that's another value chain, right? So it's mapping that against the maturity of it. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Kellogg map. Okay. I used to usually refer to this as the result chain, or like
it's exactly that. But then take that and apply it as a value chain in a Wordly-like fashion. You have a map, right?
Cool.
So hence it's that model being evolved, and that helps you again draw out. You actually have these 4 impacts you're trying to create. This doesn't actually make sense. This is disconnected. This is imagination. Your maturity on this idea is not sufficient. Whatever. Just visualization, same stuff.
Oh, cool.
Super interesting.
Part of that came from. Sorry, I'm derailing a little bit, but part of that also came from the Buria mapping.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I mean, we refer often to the result chain as a way to explain, the path from activities to impact. It helps people understand that.
Yeah. So, any other questions before we wrap up? I take that as a no. And thank you, Erik, for being here from us, and we from Dandy People. Thank you so much for spending your lunch with us. And yeah, as I said, this is a part of the Agile20Reflect Festival, and it will be up on Dandy People's YouTube channel, Dandy People Consultant, and it will also be up in the Agile Reflect archives. So thank you all very much for joining us, and thanks, Erik, for presenting.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the excellent questions as well.
Yeah, and it looks like the chat enjoyed it as well. So thank you, and thank you, Alan, for contributing something as well. So take care. I'll see you in upcoming events in February. Okay, bye.
Bye.